Welcome back to QHSE Talks, the leadership series, the place where we break down the real mechanics of leadership, culture, and high-risk decision-making. In this episode 7, we're diving into one of the most revealing and transformative processes any organization can undertake, a comprehensive assessment of leadership and safety culture. And let me tell you, this isn't a checklist exercise. This is a deep exploration of who the organization truly is. Because every organization lives with two cultures. There's the culture leaders believe exists, and the culture employees actually experience every single day. When these realities drift apart, you get misalignment, blind spots, and systemic weaknesses that quietly grow until they show up as incidents, near misses, or reputational damage. So before any organization can improve, mature, or rebuild trust, it needs something far more difficult than writing new procedures. It needs to look in the mirror, clearly, honestly, without filters. A safety culture assessment is that mirror. It uncovers the invisible forces that shape behavior, the beliefs, assumptions, pressures, and informal norms that guide decisions when no one is supervising. It tells you whether your people feel safe to speak up, whether your systems truly support safe work, and whether leadership behavior matches leadership messages. The goal is simple, but the process is complex. You're identifying where alignment exists and where serious disconnects are hiding. You're mapping strengths that make the system resilient and weaknesses that, if ignored, could become the root causes of tomorrow's major accident. And none of this can be done by a single perspective. You need an assessment team that's diverse, credible, and deeply competent. Internal members bring insight into daily operations, work pressures, and the organizational climate. External members bring unbiased eyes, questioning skills, and the ability to challenge the way we've always done it. Because here's the truth. Culture cannot be measured with one method or one mindset. You need observations to see how work is truly performed, surveys to capture perceptions, interviews and focus groups to reveal what people won't write down, and document reviews to connect behavior with systems. These data streams build a narrative of patterns, agreements, contradictions, and blind spots. A narrative that reveals not just what people do, but why they do it. And throughout all of this, communication is critical. Transparent communication from leadership doesn't just explain the process, it sets the tone, reduces fear, and creates the psychological safety needed for people to speak openly. By the end of the assessment, the organization gains a clear understanding of which type of safety culture it's operating in, whether it's blame-based, no blame, reporting, learning, flexible, informed, or truly a just culture. Most organizations sit somewhere in between, with strength on one side and vulnerabilities on the other. But all these insights, every conclusion, every recommendation, depend on one crucial element: how the assessment is operationally set up.
Okay, let's start with the operational setup then. It's a massive undertaking. Data collection across a whole organization.
Yeah.
If you're going to hold up this organizational mirror, who do you trust to hold the glass?
The quality of the team directly dictates the quality of the assessment. It's that simple.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Right. The source material really emphasizes that the team must have a broad range of competencies, expertise in organizational psychology, safety engineering, data analysis. But, and this is critical, they need a diversity of thinking styles.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if everyone on the assessment team is, say, predisposed to blame systems for everything, or conversely, to blame human error, they're going to miss the complexity. They'll find what they're looking for.
Their own biases will shape the results.
Precisely. And this can't be just an internal affair, which is where a lot of organizations get it wrong. We have to talk about that necessary tension between insiders and outsiders.
Ah, the internal-external balance.
It's non-negotiable. External members bring an absolutely essential outside perspective. It's crucial for objective data gathering and unbiased interpretation.
Because they come in cold.
They come in cold. They don't know the history, the political rivalries, the sacred cows. They are essential for seeing the organization as it truly is, not how it claims to be.
Right. They don't know who the dominant voices are or who the troublemakers are supposed to be or where the political landmines are buried.
And that allows staff to be much more honest in interviews, doesn't it? Knowing that the assessor isn't their boss's friend.
Got it.
Their methodological rigor has to be protected from these internal pressures. But on the other hand, internal members are just as crucial.
Why is that?
Because they offer the deep knowledge of the work activities, the climate, the specific operational risks. They understand the context. Sure, an external assessor might observe a deviation from a procedure and flag it as a problem.
A violation.
Right, but an internal member might explain why that deviation occurs. Maybe the official procedure is physically impossible to do with the current equipment. Without that context, findings can be misinterpreted, leading to, completely irrelevant recommendations.
Okay, so once that team is built and they start their work, the leadership's role has to shift, right?
Yeah.
From commissioning the study to managing the message.
Absolutely. Clear communication becomes paramount at this point.
Because if they communicate it poorly,
The assessment fails before the first interview. Transparency is key. Leaders must use frequent, proactive, and transparent communication. They have to articulate their vision for improved safety and directly connect that vision to the assessment process and what will happen with the outcomes.
they need to manage expectations.
And ensure the staff understand this is a systemic exercise, not some kind of individual performance review.
Because the moment people think this is an undercover gotcha operation, they'll just shut down.
Completely. The communication has to facilitate honesty. Open communication encourages a willingness to raise concerns, which is a prerequisite for a just culture.
So if the organization already has a history of a blame culture,
Then leadership has to actively fight that fear. They have to frame all communication in the context of behavioral change and system improvement, and they have to guarantee anonymity wherever possible.
it's the only way to get true, unfiltered data.
It's the only way.
Okay, now we get to the core challenge. How do you take an abstract concept like safety culture, this mix of beliefs, values, assumptions, and translate that into measurable data?
That is the crux of it, isn't it? These psychological and organizational traits, they're not directly observable or measurable. You can measure hours worked or incidents, but you can't measure trust with a ruler.
So how do we operationalize the measurement? How do we make it tangible?
The solution is to measure them indirectly through several different observable indicators.
You build a composite picture.
Exactly. You look at every angle of the organization. This requires a multidisciplinary approach to data collection. You have to capture all the facets of culture.
Such as?
Things like direct observation of behaviors, structured questionnaires or surveys, detailed one-on-one interviews and focus groups.
We also have to look at the paper trail.
Right. Reviews of safety documents and processes, and, of course, monitoring and trending performance indicators. No single input is ever enough.
This sounds like a logistical nightmare in terms of just the timing. Do you try to capture everything all at once, or do you let one stream of data inform the next?
Well, Lecture 7 talks about two schools of timing, and both are valid choices depending on what you need.
What's the first one?
The first is parallel collection. You collect all data sources, surveys, interviews, observations simultaneously within a defined window.
The advantage there is speed.
It's speed. It gives you multiple immediate data sources so the team can draw conclusions rapidly. You get a snapshot of the culture right now.
But the major drawback there, I would imagine, is you have to spend a ton of resources investigating an area that, subsequent data shows is actually fine.
Precisely. And that leads us to the second approach, which is sequential.
Okay.
Here, the findings of one method are used to inform and refine the line of inquiry for the next.
So you'd run a big survey first, maybe.
For instance, yes, if that survey shows a surprisingly low score for training adequacy, the assessment team can then focus the one-on-one interviews and document reviews specifically on the training department.
So it's a deeper, more targeted, and often more cost-effective investigation.
Can be.
But doesn't the sequential method risk stalling the whole process? I mean, if the first phase reveals some uncomfortable truths, I can imagine internal pressure building to delay or even stop the next deeper phases of the investigation.
That is a very real challenge, and it goes right back to the role of leadership transparency.
It always comes back to leadership.
It does. If the assessment team, especially the external members, isn't given absolute authority and protection to follow the data wherever it leads, the whole process can be politically hijacked.
So a trade-off. Sequential gives you better depth, but parallel gives you speed and minimizes the political window for interference.
That's a perfect way to put it.
All right, let's drill down into the tools themselves, starting with direct observation. This seems like the most straightforward, but also maybe the most misleading tool you could use.
Observation is foundational because it gives you valuable, objective insight into the lived culture.
Not the claimed culture.
Exactly. How leaders actually influence workplace behavior and whether their leadership is effective in practice, not just on paper. You're watching the difference between the procedure as written and the procedure as performed.
And where are we looking? We need to observe the organizational politics and priorities, not just the frontline work, right?
A holistic view is absolutely required. Observations should happen in various forums up and down the hierarchy.
So not just on the factory floor.
Not at all. This includes high-level work planning meetings where budgets are set, union and committee meetings where frontline concerns are voiced, employee team meetings, management meetings.
What are you looking for in those meetings?
You need to look for consistency. Is safety discussed for the first 5 minutes and then forgotten? Or is it genuinely integrated into every operational discussion and every decision?
The observation team has to be so wary of the human reaction to just being watched, though. You can't assume what you see is the norm.
That is the critical methodological hurdle. It's often called the Hawthorne effect.
People behave better when the boss is watching.
Right. People modify their behavior simply because they know they're being observed. To mitigate this, assessors have to use strategies like extended observation periods so the novelty wears off.
Or they could observe more complex tasks.
That's another great technique. Focus on naturally occurring complex, non-routine tasks where procedural flexibility is required. That often reveals the true operational priorities when people are under pressure.
And crucially, we have to remember the limitation of this data stream. It's not hard numbers.
Yes. The crucial limitation is that observations provide qualitative information only. They should never be quantified or used for statistical analysis.
You can't generalize from it.
You can't. If you watch 5 safety committee meetings and 3 of them seem tense, you can report that tension as a qualitative theme. But you cannot claim that 60% of all committee meetings are tense.
So it offers rich context.
Exactly. It's used to illuminate findings from other sources, not to stand on its own.
Okay, so next we move from watching behavior to quantifying perception, the surveys and questionnaires. This is where we get the statistically robust quantitative data.
This step is essential because, as organizational psychology shows us, people's behaviors are ultimately based on their perception of reality.
Perception is reality.
In this context, yes. If 80% of your employees perceive that their supervisor will punish them for reporting a near miss, that perception is their reality. And it will shut down your reporting culture regardless of what the official policy says.
So surveys capture those vital attitudes and opinions across the whole population.
They do.
But if we are going to base systemic organizational change on this data, the survey itself has to be, technically impeccable. Let's talk about the requirements for data reliability.
This is where we separate a professional assessment from, a simple morale survey. 2 fundamental technical requirements must be rigorously met. First is validity.
Which means?
It refers to the degree to which the questionnaire measures what it's designed or intended to measure.
You're hitting the right target.
Right. We have to ensure the questions are truly capturing attitudes toward leadership's actions, like visibility or support, and not just measuring general job satisfaction or burnout. This often requires pre-testing the questionnaire.
And the second requirement speaks to the consistency of the measurement, I assume.
That's reliability, the consistency or repeatability of the test. If the culture hasn't changed, an individual completing the survey at 2 different points in time should provide basically the same scores.
How do you even test for that?
Yeah. Well, the standard practice for demonstrating internal consistency is often a statistical calculation like Cronbach's alpha. It measures how closely related a set of items are as a group.
So if you have 5 questions about trust and management.
A high Cronbach's alpha would suggest that those 5 questions are all measuring that same theme reliably.
So, to use the classic analogy, reliability is hitting the same spot on the target every time, and validity is making sure that spot is the bullseye.
That is a perfect articulation of it. You need both.
And the format is usually that Likert scale.
Typically, yes. A quantitative Likert type scale, usually 5 or 7 points, where the responses get numerical values, which makes the data suitable for rigorous statistical analysis.
So we can really crunch the numbers.
But we should also mention the power of benchmarking. A truly robust assessment will include questions that have been validated against industry peers or other high-reliability organizations.
So you can see where you stand, not just against yourself, but against the best.
Exactly. It provides crucial external context.
We've covered the what and the how much. Now we need the why. This is where the interviews and the focus groups come in, right, to unlock all that nuance.
Absolutely. Interviews provide the rich, qualitative data you need to explain the statistical trends you're seeing in the surveys.
Let's start with one-on-one interviews.
The advantage here is maximum data density. They allow the respondent to use their own words, which gives you far greater flexibility for questioning, for immediate clarification, for detailed elaboration. You collect these deep, context-specific stories.
But those stories aren't easily aggregated. That's the core disadvantage, isn't it?
It is. The data is not directly comparable between individuals. You can't run statistical analysis on transcribed anecdotes.
So the assessment team has to synthesize all these unique stories to find shared meaning.
Which requires intensive analytical effort and real vigilance against injecting their own personal interpretation bias.
And the interviewer skill set here is just paramount. We mentioned active listening earlier, but let's elaborate on how crucial that is.
The art of active listening is the bedrock of good interviewing. The interviewer has to use specific techniques to maximize data collection and build trust, and build it fast.
So it's more than just not talking.
Oh, much more. It means paying attention and focusing completely on the speaker, not on formulating your next question. It means noting nonverbal cues, body language, feelings, shifts in tone, because that's often where the most sensitive and truthful information is.
What are some of the subtle cues we need to watch out for as interviewers?
Well, take posture, for example. An interviewer has to use an open and inviting posture. No crossed arms, leaning in slightly, making sure there's no big desk or barrier between you and the interviewee.
You're building psychological safety.
Instantly. And critically, the interviewer must maintain neutrality. You should never agree or disagree with a statement, even if you sympathize with a tough situation.
So you can't say, oh, I agree, that's terrible.
No, you should replace agreement with phrases that confirm you've understood, like, I think I understand the pressure you described, or that is a powerful example.
It keeps the data clean.
It prevents leading the witness and keeps the data clean.
Okay, now let's look at the group setting focus group interviews. They're structured very differently.
They're structured to optimize group interaction. They're typically small groups, maybe 3 to 10 participants, who are often demographically or functionally similar.
And the value isn't just getting more opinions at once.
Not at all. Their value relies entirely on the interaction within the group. When it's managed well, the group dynamic encourages people to share and challenge perceptions, and that can surface assumptions or shared cultural norms that an individual might not even recognize or articulate on their own.
It sounds like the facilitator has to be an extremely skilled diplomat then. You have to prevent the group from being completely skewed by dominant personalities.
Their role is exceptionally difficult. The facilitator must actively manage the dynamics to ensure balanced participation and prevent 1 or 2 people from dominating the conversation.
Or worse, silencing dissenting voices.
Exactly. A good technique is to use nonlinear questioning. Maybe have people write down their thoughts individually on paper first before opening the floor for discussion.
That levels the participation field.
It does. If the facilitator fails, the group might just give you the most socially acceptable, lowest common denominator response.
We've built the team. We've systematically collected terabytes of mixed data surveys, transcripts, observations. Now we move into the painstaking, detailed phase of decoding the findings, analysis and interpretation.
This is where the true value of the assessment team's expertise really shines. We start with qualitative data analysis, synthesizing thousands of pages of notes and transcripts. And this is far from a simple read-through. It's highly structured.
How does the team even begin to manage that volume of unstructured text?
It starts with a detailed iterative reading process. The first step is coding.
Okay.
You generate initial granular labels or tags that you associate with specific blocks of text. These are usually descriptive, like lack of tools, or manager avoids risk talk, or high time pressure.
So you start with these small descriptive labels, and then you start grouping the labels that are conceptually similar.
Exactly. Once you have hundreds of these initial codes, you move to theme development. This is the process of collating, nesting, and separating those codes to recognize overarching patterns and relationships.
You're moving from what they said to what it means.
Right, from descriptive coding to interpretive coding. The goal is to form an overall story of the data, an overarching structure that explains how the organization operates, not just a list of its problems.
So a bunch of codes about canceled training and ignored maintenance might?
They might collapse into a single theme, like prioritization of short-term production over long-term system integrity.
I see. And that makes sense. Meanwhile, the quantitative data is being processed using the traditional tools of statistics.
Correct. Quantitative data analysis focuses on that numerically scaled data from the questionnaires. This involves calculating the mean score for each question, which tells you the average agreement or disagreement across the whole population.
But crucially, you also have to calculate the standard deviation for each question.
Yes.
Why is that standard deviation so important?
The standard deviation indicates the spread of the answers. A low standard deviation means there is high consensus across the organization on that point. Everyone agrees.
And a high standard deviation.
A high standard deviation means there's significant internal disagreement. For instance, production staff might score really high on trust and management, while the maintenance staff score extremely low. That high variance reveals a significant organizational gap that the assessment has to address.
But a professional deep dive needs to go beyond just the mean and standard deviation, I think. What other analyses are crucial here?
For a large, robust survey, the team really has to employ factor analysis.
Okay, what is that?
It's a statistical technique used to group related survey questions into underlying theoretical constructs or factors. This confirms the questionnaires' validity, and it allows the team to report on broad themes like leadership visibility or perceived system justice instead of 100 individual questions.
It gives the organization confidence that the underlying structure of the culture is being accurately measured.
It does.
So once all the numbers and themes are developed, the team enters this crucial phase of data interpretation, where they look for how the different data streams interact with each other.
Yes. The assessment team interprets meaning by comparing the quantitative and qualitative information against established safety leadership attributes. The core task is comparison, which leads to two fundamental insights: convergence or divergence.
Let's start with the easy one, convergence.
Convergence is when data from different sources all agree, which boosts the team's confidence in that specific finding.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. If the survey data shows a low standard deviation and a high mean score for, say, supervisors provide adequate resources, and the qualitative interviews consistently describe specific instances where resources were provided efficiently.
The convergence confirms that this is a real organizational strength.
Exactly.
And now for the difficult but necessary insight, divergence.
Divergence, disagreement between data sources, is where you identify the organizational gap between intention and reality. This is the most valuable output of the entire assessment.
This is where you find the truth.
It is. For instance, the quantitative survey might show a high average score for management is committed to safety training, but
the interviews and the document review show that training is constantly scheduled and then canceled.
or replaced with generic, non-specific online modules. The divergence between the espoused value training is important and the actual practice training is disposable reveals a deep cultural flaw.
The source material specifically identifies 3 situations requiring deeper evaluation because they signal the heart of these cultural problems. We should explore these in detail.
These 3 situations are the key indicators of a systemic cultural health issue. The first involves determining the extent that behaviors, practices, and values are truly shared across the organization.
Meaning, is everyone on the same page?
Basically, if the values differ drastically between departments, say, the engineering team views risk mitigation as paramount, but the operations team sees it as an obstacle to production, then you don't have a single coherent culture. You have siloed subcultures that will eventually clash and create risk.
The second situation deals directly with that disconnect between policy and practice, the hypocrisy we often see.
This is the critical finding. Instances where the organization's espoused values, what they say in their mission statement, like, we prioritize integrity, do not match actual practices.
What they do under pressure.
Exactly. A common example is when a company claims reporting incidents is mandatory and supported, but the interview data shows that managers quickly sideline reports or subtly penalize reporters with extra assignments. The stated rule is safe, but the enforced rule is dangerous.
And the final situation focuses on the confusion of expectations.
The third situation involves variable behaviors that result from unclear expectations or conflicting definitions within the organization. If different managers define acceptable risk differently, employees will adopt different behaviors depending on who is on shift,
That lack of consistency.
which is often reflected in a high standard deviation on key survey questions, indicates that the organization has not effectively modeled or communicated what good safety behavior truly looks like.
This entire complex analysis relies on the assessment team being rigorous and objective. But we're all human, and cognitive biases can creep in and sabotage the findings. The team has to guard against these psychological traps.
This self-check is absolutely essential for credibility. For example, the team has to be hyper-vigilant against hindsight bias.
Which is?
That's the tendency to mistakenly believe that a past hazard should have been known or was obvious after a negative outcome is already known.
I knew it all along.
Right. If the team is interpreting data after a major incident, they have to focus purely on the information and risk perceptions that were available before the event occurred.
This is often the bias that leads to blaming the workers rather than the system, isn't it?
It simplifies a complex systemic failure into a simple retrospective mistake. We also need to watch for confirmation bias.
Looking for what you want to find.
Precisely. This happens when the assessment team, maybe unconsciously, looks only for data that supports the methods or programs they already believe are effective while ignoring contrary evidence.
So if they champion the new reporting software,
They might overweight positive survey responses about the software and downplay all the interview complaints about its complexity. They're looking to confirm their success, not honestly evaluate reality.
and finally, the team needs to avoid the trap of the ego. The tendency to attribute success internally but blame failure on external factors.
That is the self-serving bias. In this context, an internal assessment leader might attribute the organization's strengths to their own clever safety policies, but then blame all the failures on uncooperative workers or market conditions.
And this bias directly contradicts the foundational principle of effective safety leadership.
Which teaches that a safety leader must always blame themselves first for poor outcomes, recognizing their full responsibility for the safety outcomes in their world.
Okay. Once the data is synthesized, the interpretation is complete, and the biases are checked, the assessment team can clearly define where the organization sits on the cultural spectrum. Let's start with the one that is easiest to default to, but the most destructive: the blame culture.
The blame culture is the instinctual defensive response to failure. The investigation focuses immediately on finding who is responsible.
The witch hunt.
The witch hunt. And it leads inevitably to punishment, dismissal, or retraining as the sole response.
And we know the catastrophic consequence of this structure.
It is the single biggest barrier to organizational learning. Blaming is fast, it satisfies stakeholders who want quick action, but it creates a deep fear of recrimination.
And when fear dominates,
People stop reporting. Errors, near misses, minor deviations, they all go underground. The organization loses its early warning system, and learning just stops.
so organizations often try to overcorrect this, swinging the pendulum way too far to the opposite side, the no-name, no-blame culture.
Right. In a no-name, no-blame culture, the investigation focuses purely on finding the systemic why a problem happened. Workers are encouraged to speak openly about mistakes, and accountability for human error is essentially removed.
Which is great for encouraging reporting.
It is, but the critical weakness is the total lack of accountability. Even for unacceptable behaviors like reckless violation of procedures, it creates a vacuum where willful misconduct goes unpunished, which ultimately erodes everyone's trust in the system's fairness.
So the healthy, sustainable cultures are those built on reliability. These are the building blocks of reliability.
These are the markers of high reliability organizations. First, you have the reporting culture. People are confident they can report safety concerns without fear of recrimination.
And that data has to go somewhere.
Right, which feeds the informed culture. This culture must then collect, analyze, and disseminate that relevant data to stay continuously informed of its performance and risk profiles.
And from informed, we have to move to learning.
That's the learning culture. This organization doesn't just collect data, it learns from its mistakes and actively makes systemic changes to unsafe conditions and procedures. It views mistakes as opportunities for system improvement.
And the final block.
Finally, we look for a flexible culture, which can quickly reconfigure the chain of command and shift operational focus when faced with a dynamic, demanding task environment.
So it's responsive during a crisis, rather than rigidly adhering to a failing plan.
Exactly.
But the apex, the ideal state that balances honesty with fair accountability, is the just culture.
A just culture is a high-trust environment where people understand the clear, consistent boundary between acceptable behaviors, like honest mistakes or systemic errors, and unacceptable behaviors, like recklessness or taking unnecessary risks.
And those unacceptable behaviors are dealt with.
They're dealt with consistently, justly, and fairly. But the key is that the organization investigates the circumstances that led to the event, not just the individual. However, recognition must also be actively and consistently given for safe and high-fidelity behavior. You have to reinforce the positive.
To understand the critical importance of achieving a just culture, we have to look at what happens when it's completely absent. The catastrophes we study are so often cultural failures first and technical failures second.
Look at the tragic example of Bhopal. That disaster in 1984 represents an extreme lack of just culture and a complete failure in organizational learning.
What happened there?
Workers who tried to voice safety concerns about failing equipment or staffing shortages were ignored or penalized. In one shocking incident, the source material notes that employees were actually fined for refusing to deviate from safety regulations under pressure from management.
They were fined for following the rules.
Fined for following the rules because management wanted to cut costs. This is definitive proof that the organization's actual practices prioritized cost and schedule over the safety of both the workers and the community.
And this kind of cultural sickness allows for the spread of normalization of deviance.
This is a key finding in any assessment of a poor safety culture. It's defined as the gradual process where practices that are initially unacceptable become acceptable because they're repeated without catastrophic results.
The organization passively accepts safe outcomes from unsafe practices.
And that leads to this complacent overconfidence.
And the Deepwater Horizon disaster is the textbook example of how normalization of deviance sets the stage for catastrophe.
Absolutely. The Deepwater Horizon crew, likely due to previous safe outcomes and maybe even a decent injury record, had this inflated sense of confidence. They started prioritizing speed and cost-cutting.
What do they do?
The source material highlights the impromptu design changes, specifically reducing the required number of centralizers on the casing from 21 down to just 6.
Why?
To save time and money. This was an active deviation which senior management approved. They had become so accustomed to success that they had normalized the practice of taking these unnecessary incremental risks.
And the final piece of that cultural breakdown is the organizational learning barrier.
This barrier emerges when corporate leaders' primary priorities, cost-cutting, tight schedules, maximizing profit, are not directly related to safety, but these priorities systematically override the need to learn from weak signals.
Like in Bhopal.
In cultures like Bhopal, where management viewed workers as expendable and consistently reduced training, the capability of the entire workforce degrades, and severe incidents follow. In a healthy learning organization, leaders actively commission internal audits, they deeply value the reporting of near misses, and they use accidents that happen in other organizations as opportunities for self-assessment.
They fortify their own systems.
Right. The assessment process detailed in Lecture 7 is ultimately the systemic, structured intervention designed to interrupt those catastrophic trajectories before they reach the disaster threshold.
It's the only way to proactively check if those three crucial situations, lack of shared values, espoused values versus actual practices, and variable behaviors, are present and active within the daily operations.
It forces the organization to look at the gap before the gap becomes a chasm.
We've covered extensive ground today, diving deep into the methodology of safety culture assessment. We've established the goals, the composition of the team, the required technical rigor of the multifaceted methods, observation, survey, interview, and the critical interpretation phase that identifies convergence and, more importantly, divergence.
And we learned that the entire assessment process is designed to hold up that mirror, to systematically uncover the gap between an organization's stated intention and its lived reality.
The difference between the policy manual and the actual work being performed.
That's it.
So, what does this all mean for you as a leader? It confirms that safety leadership isn't just about setting policy from the top. It's about creating a climate of high trust and psychological safety that invites mutual engagement from the bottom up.
And as we reinforced earlier, assessing safety culture confirms that as a leader, you have full responsibility for what is going on in your world, at both upper and lower hierarchical levels. You are responsible for the cultural outcome.
There's no escaping that responsibility.
None. If we connect this to the bigger picture, assessing culture is really the only proactive defense against normalization of deviance and catastrophe. The failures we study were rarely one-off bad decisions. They were the consequence of the failure to detect anomalies and the passive acceptance of risk, because the safe outcome just kept happening. The most crucial finding of any safety culture assessment is identifying where people are speaking up or where they are remaining silent. That is the ultimate test of trust.
Right.
If your assessment process doesn't make people feel psychologically safe enough to share ideas, admit mistakes, and point out flaws without fear of punishment, then the assessment itself has failed to build the very trust it was meant to measure.
That is the ultimate challenge posed by the data.
So we'll leave you with this final thought for reflection. If you commission a comprehensive culture assessment today, how would your employees answer this critical, uncomfortable question? In the daily drive for performance, are they doing the job the right way, or are they doing it the quick way? And more importantly, would they feel safe enough to admit the truth to your assessors? That answer defines your culture.